Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome today's program, DeAndre Larry, who is head of Intermodal at Uber Freight. And today we're going to talk about how shippers can successfully navigate the intermodal transportation market. So when it comes to freight transportation, certain modes tend to dominate the spotlight. Trucking because it carries the most freight, ocean because it's the gateway to global trade, and parcel because it's the fastest growing mode and its connection to e-commerce. But there's another important way to transport freight that often doesn't get the spotlight it deserves, and that is intermodal. So what are some key trends in the intermodal market? Why should shippers consider using intermodal? And how can technology and logistics service providers help shippers incorporate intermodal into their transportation operations? Well, those are just some of the questions we're going to discuss in today's episode. And it's great to have DeAndre on the program to share his insights and advice on this topic. So DeAndre, welcome to the program.
Adrian, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So DeAndre, I mean, this is an area, the intermodal market is an area that you live and breathe in every day. It's an area that you've been involved with for a big part of your career. So obviously, you know this inside and out. So maybe as a way to kind of get started, we'll start at the high level. And I mean, how would you characterize the current state of the intermodal market? I mean, what are some key trends that you're seeing?
You bet. Thanks, Adrian. I think if I go out, as you said, to a high level, intermodal as we define it is the combination of modes to get goods through the supply chain. And so it's most typically referred to between over-the-road truck and rail, some combination of drayage on one end, rail in the middle, and then drayage on the other end. The trend that intermodal's seeing is sort of the trend that the overall market's being seen, where it's been crazy for the last couple of years. You had, 2 of the last 3 years where we didn't know if the world as we knew it was going to continue as we knew it. We all survived it, thankfully, and now we're coming out of it with the consumer a bit befuddled in terms of where to spend their money. They used to have all these options to spend it at home. Now they've got services that they can go purchase outside. And it feels like the consumer's still doing that, which is great. We all enjoy that. But what is causing is an opportunity for goods not to be purchased as much. And so that's had a dampening effect on goods that are transported in North America. And whether it's trucking, whether it's intermodal, whether it's all these other modes in that space that you mentioned, everyone's seeing a bit of a volume softening that, a lot of people, and myself included, believe we're at the trough of. It might go a little lower, it might bounce around here a little bit, but I think we're sort of at, all things being equal and knock on wood, an area where we'll probably be range bound until we begin to see this crescendo of demand that'll be driven by the consumer. Intermodal has been sort of this opportunity, as I'll call it, and we'll talk about it more, but this opportunity, as I'll call it, for shippers and the marketplace to really scale up without being reliant as much on truck drivers to scale up, without being reliant on diesel fuel to scale up, without being reliant on new entrants and other things in the market to build capacity to scale up. Intermodal is a operating platform that Uber Freight enjoys a large share in, and we have rail partners that are committed to this business. We think it's an opportunity for the market to scale up as the market grows in the future.
Yeah, no, I've been hearing similar things from others and shippers as well that are using the intermodal as part of their transportation operations. I mean, I think the interesting thing about intermodal is that by definition you're talking about multiple modes, right? So it's impacted by what's happening in the rail market, what's happening in the trucking market. So it's really a multiplication factor there, right? Because it's not just it's the combination of these things that ultimately impact how successful the intermodal service can be, depending on what's happening on the rail side of things and the trucking side of things. But there is a difference, of course. So, and I think you just touched upon it a little bit. If I'm a shipper, then why should I consider using intermodal? I mean, what benefit does it provide relative again to these other modes?
Yeah, you mentioned all the things, and it's very astute observations. I think if I'm a shipper, if I'm talking to the CEO or the chief sourcing officer or the head of sales at any large company, I would ask this question to my leaders throughout my organization: how are you leveraging intermodal, and how have you exhausted those opportunities to make sure that we're paying the right cost, not just from a dollars perspective, but from a carbon perspective. I'd ask my leaders that. And then the second thing I would ask is, how do you incorporate intermodal into our strategy so that we have optionality and capacity as the market scales back up? Because, we've seen systems, tools, people leverage things like process and other things, technology, to buy trucks smarter, to buy over-the-road freight smarter. But I think the fundamental issue that we saw over the last couple of years was optionality and capacity. And so if I'm a CEO or a senior leader at any consumer packaged goods company or automotive company or retail company in general, I would ask my supply chain leaders, what is intermodal's opportunity for us in our organization to address not just carbon and savings, but also capacity and resilience in our supply chain as we move forward. And I think the more people that ask that question will see that they have very low penetration within intermodal. And do I think it should be, the vast majority? In my wildest dreams, I hope so. But it should not be the less single-digit share of the North American market that is today. Because I think the answer to that question is too important, and it's an underutilized asset. And it's frankly why I'm here at Uber Freight, because I believe in intermodal. I believe that it's not just a helpful cure from a carbon standpoint, not just a helpful cure in terms of dollars being deployed in the most efficient way in the supply chain standpoint, but I believe it's got capacity and resilience to help us grow as a country in a fast and efficient way so that we're ready for these next step function opportunities that we know will come.
Yeah, I love those two questions. I think that's a great way to frame the conversation, around intermodal, and absolutely optionality, I think, is something that was put in the spotlight, was on the radar for a lot of C-level executives, as a result, partly of, COVID, what happened in the COVID pandemic. But, we see right now with, whether it's labor constraints, or regulations or other things on the table, that are happening in the transportation market. Optionality is certainly something that, from a risk perspective, from a resilience perspective, is something that every leader needs to be thinking about and talking about. And then you brought up, I think sustainability as well. I mean, do you see the interest and the role of intermodal growing as, a lot of people expect to see more regulations coming into play in terms of, having to measure carbon emissions, having to track carbon emissions, having to reduce carbon emissions, and so forth. Do you see that driving more demand for intermodal?
I do. We've published a white paper at Uber Freight, and there's other, readings out there, other thoughts on this, but they all center around this idea that there'll be more focus in the future on carbon reduction versus less. And when you know that a rail intermodal move is, 400 miles on a gallon of fuel for every ton moved, you just won't get that kind of utility from over the road. And so you don't need regulations to use intermodal. You don't need someone to tell you. It's just good businesses to me when you couple that with the cost savings opportunity that you get, when you couple that nextly with the amount of capacity that our rail partners across North America have aggressively gone to put on to support the intermodal business. And so, yes, to answer your question, I think it's definitely something that more executives and organizations that purchase transportation are aware of and trying to find a path towards. But it's so much more than that too. It's you're less reliant on truckers having to scale up and go into a field that we've seen truckers struggle to attract employees into. Intermodal is a way to mitigate your risk there. Intermodal is a way to mitigate your risk on capital in terms of actual trucks you've got to go deploy. If you have metrics like, number of trucks used per ton of freight moved, this is a way to bring that down. And that's an easy way to know that, hey, I'm not requiring my supply chain and others to go out and get as many assets that support my business. Therefore, by definition, I'm getting a more efficient solution presented to me. I think intermodal offers all those opportunities.
Yeah, no, a lot of great points there. So let's talk a little bit about technology now. I mean, particularly transportation management systems, which is an area that I've been focused on for the past 24 plus years as an industry analyst. And usually when you talk about TMS, transportation management systems, overwhelmingly you're thinking about, well, truckload, less than truckload. But I'm just kind of curious, what role does technology like TMS, play in optimizing and streamlining intermodal, transportation processes?
It's a very important role. It's the decision matrix that things get filtered through. And I would argue a couple of things. If I would again be talking to those CEOs and chief marketing officer and chief sourcing officers of companies that have any portion of transportation out there running for their business, I would say ask your vendors this: how does their TMS solution encompass intermodal into it? Because if the answer is it doesn't, I would argue, just I can't believe that's the right answer. I believe that you at least want the optionality to what we said before for the TMS solution to filter through that. So it's sort of garbage in, garbage out. I think the TMS solutions of the have the ability to be resilient, have the ability to talk to multiple systems, to be adaptive, but it also will have intermodal inside of it as a solution that's offered up to the client.
Yeah, no, that's again another great question to ask, because I think historically, like I said, a lot of TMS was primarily focused on TL, less than truckload. In more recent years, they've added parcel because of the growth of e-commerce. But I think historically, intermodal rail has been kind of the weak link in a lot of TMS solutions. So it's a good question to ask, particularly as you said, if this is going to become a more critical mode for a lot of shippers, and again, to have that optionality on the table to be able to optimize and execute successfully, you're going to need technology or TMS, to be able to do that, effectively, and to be able to scale it, effectively as well. Similar question. A lot of shippers obviously work with logistics service providers to help them with their transportation operations. So how can logistics partners like an Uber Freight help shippers incorporate intermodal into their transportation operations and successfully manage their shipments?
Yeah, I think we will be successful in this space all the time if we can deliver, I'll call it 4 core things to shippers. I think the first is capacity and resilience, and the ability to scale that capacity. It's not just in a low market like right now where there's plentiful capacity out there, but a platform that has tentacles across, not just over the road, which, by the way, I think Uber Freight does. We've got a large band of truckers that are on our platform, not just in managing your transportation, but also in having access into as many places as possible that give you capacity as the market scales up. I think that's the first thing. You said it earlier. The second thing is, to me, something that reduces your reliance on emitting carbon to manage your supply chain. I think the companies that can show that as a way of doing business, not as a new gadget, not as, by definition, intermodal, I think, does that for shippers. So, you're going to show that you can scale up and add capacity. You're going to show that you can reduce the commitment to carbon that you have to do that. And then I think if you have flexibility, and it's kind of a byproduct of those other two, but if you have the agility, both from your TMS perspective, from your leadership approach perspective, sort of how you buy, how you service the client, how you engineer solutions for them, then I think you'll be successful long term. And then I think we can't ignore the fact that you got to help them understand that their costs are better and they save costs by doing this versus the next best option. And so I think if you do those 4 things, manage costs well for them, show that it's reduced costs or smarter cost spend, give flexibility, give them the ability to be less reliant on carbon emissions to handle their supply chain, and then be able to scale it up and add capacity. I think there isn't if we do that well, I'll just say that if we do that well in the supply chain, you will be the successful one. You will be the winner.
I love those 4 points. I think your fourth one was cost, and I think that's always the leading one, right? Because in the transportation industry, so many folks are in companies are so hyper focused on cost reduction, cost management, and so forth. But I think the leaders are going to be the ones that look beyond cost and look into those 3 things that the additional things you talked about in terms of flexibility, in terms of scalability, in terms of providing additional capacity and so forth. So I like the fact that it's not just about cost; it's about these other things that you highlighted in your response there. So we could probably go on for hours talking about intermodal. I'm sure it's obviously a topic that's you're very passionate about, and would like to see more shippers, take advantage of. And I think they will, because of all the things that we've talked about today. But maybe as a way to wrap up, I mean, what actions should shippers take to get started with intermodal, or if they're already, using it to improve their performance in this area?
Yeah, I think it's intermodal will be a solution to a question. It won't be the solution for everything. And so I think it's the types of questions that we ask as leaders inside of organizations. How am I reducing my reliance on empty miles? How am I reducing my reliance on carbon? How am I reducing my reliance on an expansion in truck driver capacity over the next 10 years versus my reliance on ways to mitigate my need for more truckers to come to this market that over the years they haven't shown that they're willing to join as in abundance like they were in the past. They've got other options. It's the types of questions you'll ask. How do I guarantee that I have more optionality in my supply chain? I think it's through answering those questions that their organizations will show them and really lead them to, intermodal is one of those solutions. I think there's a technology piece of this. You asked about TMS, and that's critical. You have to have TMS that give you breadth, give you agility, and help create that flexibility and optionality that I talked about. That's part of the solution. I think you'll have to, as we said before, I mean, I can't go into any CEO's office and not walk out expecting that I need to help she or he understand how their costs are better after I leave, and how that they have more resilience and all those things. But cost has to be part of it. But I would encourage people to ask those questions about their supply chain. We've learned over the last couple of years that we may, as leaders, want to ask about the what ifs, because the what ifs might actually happen. And so as we think about what those what ifs are in the future, I think we can't understand what that exact what if might be. But if we ask questions like, no matter what that what if is, how do I future-proof myself by having resilience, capacity, less reliance on carbon, less reliance on people going to a field to work that they typically haven't, over the last 10 years haven't driven themselves to, no pun intended, to work in, and we don't expect them to do that going into the future. So how do I become less reliant on, it's that metric, how many trucks per ton did my business use to get from point A to point B? And if the number isn't answered, that's a question. If the number's more than it used to be, then I would challenge every other leader to ask, well, what about intermodal? Because it's an easy button, in my opinion. I'm biased, but in my opinion, to accomplish that. I've seen the leaders at all the railroads commit capital, commit strategic resources to growing intermodal. I've seen leaders inside of Uber Freight, and decide, this is our opportunity to help our shippers, our customers expand their opportunity to be resilient long term. And so I would get started that way, is through the questions that we ask.
Yeah, and all those questions, the ones you just brought up and the ones you brought up earlier in our conversation, I think are all great ways to get the conversation started within, executive teams within companies to really, put the spotlight on intermodal and look at it as a valuable option as part of their overall transportation operations, moving forward. Well, DeAndre, we covered a lot of ground today. You provided some great insights and advice on intermodal. And again, thank you for making the time to be with us today to, again, shed light on this topic.
Thank you for the opportunity. Always welcome it. Thank you for being interested in it. I think we can actually change the world in a lot of ways. I think we can drive structural, efficient change into a space that I think can use it. And I'm looking forward to being part of it.
Great. And I agree. And I think, having these conversations and helping to educate the market is part of that process and part of, what Talking Logistics is all about. So again, thank you for making the time. I want to thank those of you that joined us. If you're watching this episode on demand, either at the Uber Freight website or on Talking Logistics, and you've got a question or a comment for DeAndre, feel free to post it there, and I'm sure he'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.